So the people like Sam Altman, what he wants to be able to do now in his pursuit of artificial general intelligence, which is basically the holy grail of AI. That's real AI.
Yep.
What we call AI is not AI. They've had to change the name.
AGI is Skynet.
AGI is what they've had to change it to because AI isn't really AI. AGI should just be AI, but
AI is just like quite a powerful search engine.
It's like 4G and 5G. You know, AT&T or one of them jumped the gun, didn't it, and started calling it 5G.
Exactly.
Then you've got a problem. You have to sort of rebrand it. So they've had to rebrand AI AGI, but AGI is what he's trying to get to.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. A rare just the two of us. We should we should have a little Bill Withers
just
cut in
two of us.
With me and Ian.
He's not doing them because we keep saying it.
Yeah, no, we did that last week, didn't we?
It's by all the opportunities.
Yeah, it's like on Joe Rogan when he gets a guest and he goes, "You should have this person on." You can just feel Joe Rogan bristling, being, "I'll be the fucking judge of who I'm going to get on." Yes, we were going to have a guest and they had to pull out at last minute. Obviously, I'm not going to be a dick and name and shame them. But that's why it's just the two of us. Because we have guests much more often than not these days, isn't it?
Hopefully he does it then.
You what?
Hopefully he does it then at your second.
Right, just the two of us. And I think I've mentioned that before. That was our first dance, me and the missus when we got married.
Oh, was it?
Oh, that's
I didn't know that.
It was funny, actually. I was already quite a few drinks in at that stage. And I'm not known for my dancing. You'll be amazed to hear.
Yeah.
But we
I remember seeing you in that speakeasy when you were 50.
Oh God, did I attempt to dance then?
I think everybody had an attempt by the end of the night.
Wasn't part of that Magda's fault? Wasn't she trying to make everyone dance? So it's your wife's fault.
Probably.
Anyway, and so the couple have to come up and do a dance, and normally I'd be catastrophic, but I was quite loose and obviously happy. And then people after were going, "God, did you have lessons?" I was going, fucking hell.
You must have done, yeah. You must.
Well,
have,
I just kept time reasonably well.
Did you do a split at the end?
Yeah. Did some Michael Jackson pirouettes and shit.
I can't remember what my dance was to. It's probably some Slovak shit-kicking song or something.
Shit-kicking. Is that a national pastime?
One of those
you coming out to kick some shit later.
Like the Cossacks with
right.
No, Ian just did a mosh pit.
Yeah, he just had some Slipknot as his wedding thing. Anyway,
the worst song to play at a first dance at a wedding. I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Right, yeah.
You too.
or Woman by the Anti-Nowhere League. That's quite funny. They're an English punk band, and they've got this funny song called Woman, where it starts as almost a ballad, and it says, "Woman, I'm in love with you," and all that sort of thing. And then as the tempo of the song increases, so does the animosity of the lyrics. And by the end of it, he's just screaming expletives and say, and I think the final sort of refrain is, "Woman, why me?"
Yeah.
So yeah, Woman, Anti-Nowhere League, funny song. All right. So yeah, we will sort of crack on. I've got a few. I haven't been out and about this week. Have you been out and about this week, Ian?
No.
No little bitchy comments about how you're not allowed to.
No, I've not been out and about.
Right.
No.
Okay.
Although we are out and about next week a little bit, aren't we?
What are we doing?
We are going to an Orange thing.
Oh yeah, I think I've subbed Andrew in for that.
Oh, okay.
But then the week after that, I'm going to Network X with your lovely colleague Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
What was I going to say?
And me.
And you, yes, of course. Just a couple of little shout-outs, not anything specifically to do with us or the pod, just some bits of news that we didn't write up, but are sort of industry-specific. I guess you could call this a sort of semi-regular thing. I noticed a press release that says someone you met recently, Ian, Harmeen Mehta, is moving on from BT.
Yeah, I wrote a story this week about Harmeen Mehta.
Oh, right.
Where she gave the big lowdown on their approach to Gen AI when they were in Industrial Park. And it's always the way, isn't it? You write one of these stories. BT's done this to me.
You think I've got myself a solid contact there. Then she clears off.
Well, but I remember interviewing the guy who used to be head of Division X. And I sat on the interview for a bit, and then I eventually wrote it up. And then 2 days later, and I think the story was like one of those things about how there's big things ahead, and he's really enthusiastic to be there. And by the time it's published,
he fucks off to work on his allotment.
Could it be that it's you, Ian?
Maybe,
do you know what I mean? There's a bit of a common thread going on.
But I didn't detect any. I think the Harmony Meta thing is worth our little sort of intro bit when we sort of talk about another story that's not one of the main ones. I think we should talk about it for a few minutes because we talked about Neil McRae when he left quite a lot.
This is one of the reasons I brought it up. But if you've got more to say other than...
I'm curious as to her leave. So when she was obviously at Adastral Park and being put in front of the press a little bit, I mean, she wasn't on any of the panels, that's true. But she was sort of lined up to speak to me, and I didn't get any inkling from any of the PR guys. Now maybe they're just doing their jobs very well, and hush hush. But there was no sense that she was on her way out.
No, although they did, as Andrew said, he had an interview lined up, and then they bailed at the last minute. So that might be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to having tried to line up an interview with her for about a year.
Right,
it's quite interesting that it eventually comes through when she's about to leave.
Maybe that's it. She finally felt like she didn't give a fuck. Yeah, she was going to talk to you.
But she didn't. It's not like she said anything scandalous or anything. So I just think it's the nature of her. I mean, I saw Ray had covered it as well on Telecom TV this morning, and he put that they'd axed her. I think was his headline. His headline was she'd been axed.
Well, let's.
But axed is one of those things. I don't know. You could sort of justify using it even if someone's decided they want to move on.
I would. If Ray was here now and he meant anything other than sacked, I would challenge him on the use of that word.
I'm going to have to check because I don't want to sort of put...
Well, while you're doing that, I'll just read from their press release. So it says, BT Group has announced changes to its strategy and change and digital units, which is slightly awkward. So Tom Meakin, an ex-McKinsey management consultant, is Chief Strategy and Change Officer. I don't know why change has to be thrown in there. Fucking annoying.
Yeah.
But there we go. And then Tom will also pick up responsibility for innovation and strategic partnerships, which sounds like part of strategy to me, but what do I know? Which are currently sitting within the digital unit. And then this is the bit that relates to Harmeen. As a result of these changes, digital will now fully focus on BT Group's digital transformation, and Harmeen Mehta, Chief Digital and Innovation Officer, will leave BT Group. So that does sound like Tom Meakin was given her responsibility and she was kind of sidelined.
Well, and also Howard Watson's got some of her responsibility.
He has as well, yeah. So that's the second part of that paragraph.
Yeah, which is... and
like he hasn't got enough on his plate.
So Ray, when we say Ray, we're talking about Ray LeMaitre at Telecom TV. Used to be
our former colleague and boss.
And his headline is BT axes digital chief Harmeen Mehta in top table revamp. And it seems... I don't know, it seems quite dramatic to me. I mean, someone resigns at this level, you've got like a sort of 6 month or something longer notice period, haven't you? So they would have, if she just decided that she was going to move on and this was all arranged, she would.
You sure she didn't say anything tasty to you? Maybe she wasn't going to go.
She said interesting things.
And then she
didn't say anything that was, it wasn't like I hope it wasn't a dull interview. I mean, I wrote it up as a story about, because, they came out with this announcement about this gateway product they've come out with. I think you covered it, or someone did for you.
Right.
This gateway that allows you to use different Gen AI models and not be tied to one. Yeah. That's what she was talking about. I mean, she actually kind of gave me almost a scoop on it because she announced it before it had been announced, but I didn't write it until the announcement came out. So, but I mean, I don't know if it would make a huge difference to people.
Call yourself a journalist. Reading
it a lot, but she talks about that and why they'd done it. So when I wrote it up, it was kind of their rationale and where it gets them and what the benefits are. But there was no sense that she was about to go, and I just wonder if there's something. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
I think sometimes you get. Bear in mind, this is all about the strategy team. You do get disagreements on strategy. Like I don't think Neil McRae ever explicitly said that to us in any of the podcasts that we've had, but I think it was clear that they got to a stage where they wanted to go in a certain direction, and he was like, "I'm not so sure."
Yeah,
and I think it was amicable.
Yeah,
they didn't start throwing chairs at each other. But he sort of went to I mean, this is me interpreting. This is no direct quote from him. But I got the impression that he sort of went, well, in that case, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah.
And maybe this is another of those things. And I think it's interesting that every time that happens, Howard Watson gets a new responsibility. So maybe Howard, maybe he's the Game of Thrones player here.
I mean, the thing that Neil was quite strict about, I think, was, and that BT's kind of maintained after he's gone, is this public cloud position that they have.
Yeah.
And that also marks Harmeen out quite differently from the rest of BT.
Oh yeah, so maybe it's
but it's
sort of theological debate on that.
But I don't think it's irreconcilable, their two positions, because what she's looking after was the IT estate, where they're much, much happier to use the public cloud for the hosting of that. And their situation when it comes to network telco workloads is that they want to keep that on their own private cloud. Yeah, that's the big kind of difference in position. And you get some operators that are obviously much more of the thinking that you could possibly realise bigger efficiencies by putting everything into the public cloud. Yeah. Like Telefonica Germany, for instance, let's say. I mean, there aren't very many, actually, that have gone whole hog in doing this. So.
I think it might be even simpler than this. Rereading the press release.
I'm not saying it's
I'm
not that, by the way.
I'm just sort of going back from the cloud tangent and onto the core press release. I think it is as simple as this Tom Meakin got given a big promotion and a big load of responsibility, which ate into Harmeen's territory, and so she went, fuck it then.
Maybe it is that, yeah.
That's the vibe I get from it. Anyway, So that's one thing I wanted to shout out. Another thing I wanted to shout out is Lutz Schuler, who is the CEO of Virgin Media, VMO2, Virgin Media O2 UK. And he's stepping back for a little bit because he's had a diagnosis of prostate cancer. So sorry to hear that, Lutz. Apparently, according to the quotes, I'm actually reading this in ISP review, but I think I sent a press release. Yeah, right. I mean, I didn't even get the press release, but I'm sure I could go.
I mean, it's very obviously up early when they come out with something that's so specific, because sometimes you just get an update that someone's off for personal reasons, don't you? But
it's
they obviously probably wanted to. I suppose if you give the detail, it stops the speculation about what those personal reasons are. But yeah, obviously wish someone the best who's going through that.
Well, quite. And the good news is, according to their quote that I'm reading from ISP Review, is that it's been caught early. And yeah, I know, not from personal experience, but certainly close relatives, that's one of the ones where if you catch it early, it's fairly easy to deal with. But yeah, so get well soon, Lutz, and sorry for taking the piss out of your haircut. And once you're better, I'll start taking the piss out of it again. And then the last one, I just saw a little press release came through. Just quick shout out that TIP, the Telecom Infra project, which is what all that fuse and all that stuff is, has got a new president, and that's Caroline Chan from Intel.
Which is interesting. Might actually dovetail with something we
it might do.
And I'm also curious. I only caught that literally before I ran out the house, because I was really late getting out the house today, and I'm not quite sure what this means for the other people who've been presiding over stuff within TIP, and specifically Iago Tenorio, who's very much been the kind of, when you go to the fuse, he's very much the kind of,
he's been very prominent, hasn't
he? The Grand Master, if you like. He leads everything,
and he's been deposed.
Has he? So she's stepping into his role. I can't tell.
No. Let me read the opening spiel. This is actually.
It's a shame if he's not there anymore, by the way, I would say, because I've always found him really engaging, and it's usually a chance to talk to him when you're at that.
Yeah. But so this is actually just the supporting blurb from the PR people who sent it to me, which is Babel. It said Caroline Chan from Intel has been elected as TIP president, and Rob Sonny from AT&T has been appointed as chairman, succeeding Iago Tenorio. And then they don't say anything else about Iago Tenorio.
Okay, so Robert. Okay, yes, I had noticed that Robert Sonny, who was there last year, and he's very much obviously involved with the whole AT&T Ericsson Open RAN thing,
right?
If we're going to call it Open RAN, I had noticed that he'd become involved, but that's a shame. It's a shame, I think, from a reporter's perspective, that Iago Tenorio is
he's really engaging.
He's engaging and
to speak to.
Gives good quote and all that, and they're an interesting company, Vodafone.
We've got a quote from Iago. Do you want this outgoing quote?
Sure.
It has been a privilege to serve as chairman of TIP. Together we have made incredible progress in transforming the telecom landscape through open invitation, and I'm excited to see where Rob Sonny will lead TIP next. That's a fairly generic. I reckon, so my gut feel from that is there's nothing contentious there.
I think they just circulate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like
also, it must be quite a lot of extra work.
It is, yeah.
I mean, Jagger presumably got to a stage where he went, look, I've put in a good shift.
He's got a fair amount.
Someone else's fucking turn. Yeah, well, exactly. And Caroline Chen, I don't know very well, but I've met her at least one dinner, and I just think she's really good fun to chat to. So yeah. I welcome that.
I remember you telling me about that dinner.
Yeah.
Sounded like a fun one.
Yeah, no, she's good fun. So yeah, let's see where she takes it. I don't know what a public speaking is like, but if it's anything like a dinner conversation, it'll be engaging. So so I just wanted to make those 3 little industry things to shout out. Okay, in terms of what we're going to talk about this week, we can start with AI. I've written quite a lot about AI this week, especially with a focus on OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT and all that stuff.
In other words, not open at all.
Well, this is and increasingly less so. And there's quite a lot of intrigue there, and it kind of plays into a broader topic of the direction AI is going to go into, which in turn plays into some of my favourite references of like Terminator, Matrix and all that sort of thing. So I think we'll talk about that. And then what was the middle one again, Ian?
So just on the AI thing as well. There's a I've written about Dell and its kind of new kind of AI for telecom strategy this week.
Okay,
and Dell's
cool.
Obviously a really significant company because it's pretty much, I think, the biggest server maker in the world, isn't it? It's Dell, HPE, and Dell.
Yeah. It's right up there.
Well, yeah, Dell. It's only Dell, HPE, and Supermicro with the big 3.
Supermicro, I just saw on Tech Memes having some kind of accounting crisis at the moment.
But I, despite writing about like servers and
shares down 12%. Mate.
I was going to say.
Do you have any Supermicro?
No.
but despite writing about like server equipment, common off-the-shelf equipment as it gets called, for a long time, I've never actually had much interaction with Dell until this week.
No.
And I spoke to the guys, the head of their whole telecom thing, Dennis Hoffman. So I wouldn't mind talking about that bit. But the other,
I remember what the middle one is. You go on, say it.
No, go on, you do.
It's
the master of ceremonies.
It's the but you wrote about it anyway. It's a little sort of spat between Deutsche Telekom and Meta.
Yes,
which concerns the fair share debate and that sort of thing. So Nick wrote about it for us. But yeah, they both came out with blog posts which seem to be sort of slightly briefing against each other.
Well, it's very heated.
Oh, okay, fine.
Meta is not above the law was the headline of Deutsche Telekom as well.
God, I'm sorry to generalise, but that's such a German thing to say, isn't it? The rules!
There are rules.
Well, they love rules when it suits them.
Yeah, well, there is that.
But this is how I almost started my piece, actually. I mean, he loves this kind of Wild West American approach to Timotheus Herkes, doesn't he? Where it's laissez-faire.
Right, until suddenly the rules are on his side.
Yeah, this is what I made.
Then he's suddenly sticking his towel on the deck chairs first thing in the morning.
Do we know what happened to Supermicro? Because they had this huge rally at the beginning of the year from like.
Well, I'm just telling you, I saw fleetingly there's some kind of accounting irregularity thing going.
But so in January, February.
If Scott was a proper journalist, he'd have noticed that and gone, I'm going to look into what's going on with Supermicro, and he hasn't done.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it rallied massively from $300 to $1,200 in like February, and now it's at $400. But it only dropped like $40.
I mean, the spike will have presumably been AI hype.
Yeah. I guess.
The weird thing about Supermicro is Dell and HP are much noisier on their PR front, isn't it? Supermicro, never hear a word from them.
No.
When does ever anybody write about Supermicro? Especially in
It's
telecom.
an annoying name as well.
It is an annoying name.
Super. Is it? Are you super?
Yeah.
It's just weird because they, like NVIDIA kind of maintained, but they really collapsed.
Yeah. Well, that's been exacerbated by some kind of accounting thing, but this is something I fleetingly saw on Tech Meme, so don't sue me, Supermicro, if I've got that wrong. In fact, I'm going to look on Tech Meme now and see if I can find it. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to finish off by talking about Intel, Caroline Chan's company, where Intel's having a bit of a mare at the moment in terms of sort of just corporate performance, which goes back many years due to some missteps in terms of manufacturing where it fell behind TSMC and that sort of thing.
They had a big win a few weeks ago, right?
With AWS.
Yeah, that's it.
But I think, it felt like a big win, but it kind of papered over the cracks. But the thing that has interested me this week was two things. One was something that was actually breaking when we were recording the pod last week, which was a rumor that Qualcomm was thinking of buying them. It says something about the state of Intel.
Oh,
that there's a rumor about Qualcomm, which certainly the not too distant past was a smaller company.
There's a lot of stories about Intel at the moment and things going on, and I think
you're going to say trial balloon, aren't you?
Yeah, that phrase that you use. I think there's a lot of that going on at the moment with Intel.
I was shocked to see that they're not even worth 100 billion. I thought they would be way more.
Well, because
they're worth shit because they've basically gone like that this year, in the last couple of years.
For those listening, he did a downward gesture with his hand.
Yeah, I can't. I keep thinking it's just like a TV program, and
but like Qualcomm is only
our lovely faces, and
Qualcomm is like 180 billion, I think. They're not that much bigger.
Yeah, but there was certainly a time not that long ago where it was smaller.
Well, we can talk about this one.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about that, and I'm also. I mean, my angle on it is also. Because the second thing, which I wrote this morning, is to do with state subsidy. Basically, the US government's chucking about 20.
Let's do this when we get to it.
Okay. I was just previewing it, but yes, fine. I'll stop it there. So let's go back. There's a fine line between previewing and then just suddenly going down the rabbit hole, isn't there? Yeah. AI. So let me cue this one up. What's my first story on it? I've sort of linked back to... Yeah, the reason I move it, Pierre, is because I can't read my fucking laptop. Okay. Here we go.
Did you have a picture of the Terminator robot in one of your
No, I went with Sam Altman. Although for my first one, I went with an NVIDIA photo from their press release, which they won't appreciate, and I'll tell you why.
Right. Is it Jensen Huang?
No.
Or Jensen Button, as I like to call him.
No, it's of people with NVIDIA lanyards, and it's a bloke pointing at a laptop and two young women in front of him. But the reason I put it is in my third paragraph of the story I'm about to refer to. I said NVIDIA because this was the first part of my story was about this new US government initiative called Partnership for Global Inclusivity on AI. Which I'll
they always have to have a new initiative.
Yeah.
To do with something.
And anyway, and I said NVIDIA, which you can see being inclusive in the above image, published its own press release on the matter. And so I was being a bit snarky because they put this picture of them just being all lovely and fluffy, just standard sort of PR type of stuff. But anyway, so that story I wrote earlier on this week, and the headline was AI Utopian Propaganda Reaches Fever Pitch. And so what I'm basically saying is that we're getting a lot of incoming messaging saying how brilliant AI is going to be. And it may well be. But I think it sort of deliberately glosses over the downsides.
Yeah.
So it's utopia versus dystopia.
Where the positive messages I'm getting are coming from people like Jensen
Yeah,
Button.
Funny that. Jensen Button.
Coming out of retirement.
Yeah. Well, quite. I mean, it's funny that NVIDIA, which has seen its share price go through the ceiling on the back of AI, is really fucking in favour of it.
Yeah.
And then the other person who's a major protagonist in this narrative is Sam Altman, who runs OpenAI. So they're not exactly...
Basically doesn't make any money, but wants a lot of funding.
Yeah, well, actually, talking about making money, there's a twist to that.
Oh, for profit, yeah.
Exactly. So the first part of it was, I'll read my first paragraph. The US Department of State has announced a new partnership with Amazon, Anthropic, Google, IBM, Meta, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and OpenAI, in which they'll collectively commit $100 million to making things better for poor countries. Isn't that nice? I said in my article. Obviously,
very altruistic.
Very much telegraphing my skepticism. Anything, I always sort of slightly apologise when I generalise about Americans on this pod, partly because quite a lot listen and partly because I don't want it to sound like I've got an issue with them. But it's the other culture apart from the Brits that I probably know that I'm most familiar with. So I'm inclined to make certain sort of sweeping observations. And one thing the Yanks love is a good euphemism. They love to sugarcoat stuff. They like to, give missiles names like the Fluffy Bunny or something like that.
Freedom candy.
Yeah. Or they'll call it something like the Peacekeeper, and it's something that...
Hey, come on, the British have the Storm Shadow.
We all do it. We all do it.
People don't know these names, though, do they?
Yeah.
They're pretty... People don't even know what Enola Gay is. They thought that was like when the song got released, they thought it was like a song about homosexuals.
Right.
How
it was the name of the plane that dropped the nuke, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if you work in marketing?
Or was it the bomb itself? No, that was called Little Boy, I think.
Little Boy was the bomb, yeah.
Little Boy and Fat Man?
Fat bastard.
Yeah. But imagine you work in marketing at those companies. You create
well, exactly.
something that kills people. And you're like, oh, what are we going to call it? Let's call it something
Yeah,
sexy.
we'll call it the sort of tasty marshmallow or something. And look, and it's part of our job as journalists is to be the recipient of marketing and to decode it and to pick holes in it and to be skeptical about it. So I don't apologise, but I do sometimes think, does it sound like I'm always having a go at the Americans? And I'm not. I had a go at Germans earlier.
No, I think you're fairly sort of level in having a go at all nationalities.
Yeah, jolly good. And anyway, and it goes on. So the press release for this thing, this partnership for global inclusivity on AI, is called.
Right.
I mean, that by itself, is that what it is? All these people have got together because all they really care about is fucking global inclusivity. Do me a favour. Anyway. And it goes, quote from the press release, "This effort recognises that effective and equitable AI solutions must be rooted in understanding and respect for diverse cultures, languages and traditions of the communities they serve. To this end, the PGIAI will focus on 3 areas: 1, compute, 2, capacity, and 3, context."
So basically it's a plan to dump all their AI products on emerging markets.
Well, quite. This is, in fact, here's my sarky start of my 3rd paragraph. "It's great that the US state and all these tech giants are devoting this small fraction of their time and resources to good causes. Any resulting expansion of US global influence and control over AI, not to mention the seeding of new markets for the companies involved, will be purely coincidental and the least they deserve for their heartwarming philanthropy." I was in quite a sarky mood this week, and most of my writing's got a bit of that tone to it.
Yeah.
And so there was that. And then NVIDIA's got a little quote, and that's where I extracted that photo of them being inclusive, going, all we really care about is poor people and the downtrodden, money. We don't even know what money is. And then on top of that, on exactly the same day, and then again using my arsey tone that I've reverted to this week, I said, coincidentally, the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, chose the very same day to publish a piece titled "The Intelligence Age," which paints a picture of an AI-run future in which everything is much, much better. Quote, "Eventually, we can each have a personal AI team full of virtual experts in different areas working together to create almost anything we can imagine," he wrote.
What do these virtual AI experts look like, I wonder?
Well, we don't know yet. This is
Are
all...
they like little C-3POs?
Well, this is all just abstract. This is all just abstract right now. But I urge you to read it.
Do you know what I'm waiting for, actually? Is for someone to take one of those Boston Dynamics dogs and integrate AI with it and stick a gun on its head.
They have already.
They've stuck a gun on its head because I've seen it shooting at a firing range. One of them.
Yeah.
On a not live. Obviously.
And they'll have
been there.
They'll have a little press release talking about how it's got a 100% track record in neutralising threats or some shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's RoboCop. There we are. We always talk about Terminator and Matrix. Let's throw fucking RoboCop into the mix. Yeah. Well, quite, because in RoboCop they actually had the full robotic ones, which were the antagonists in the first RoboCop, wasn't it?
But the difference there is that they weren't very smart. They just sort of stood there and said the same thing. Whereas if you put like ChatGPT into a kind of robot dog's brain,
I think you're giving ChatGPT in its current form too much credit there. I think it's about as smart as the robots in RoboCop.
Okay, yeah, I'll take that back.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean. It's like
Sam Altman insists that that soon it would be fucking brilliant, and so he's written this thing called The Intelligence Age, which is, the best of my knowledge, the only thing he's ever published, certainly on this URL, which is called ia.samaltman.com.
Yeah.
And
he's quite a sinister character, I think.
Well, this is my general narrative about him, and I've got my second piece on a matter drills down into that. I realise I'm sort of monologuing a fair bit.
I feel that he's also escaped some of the. I mean, these tech bosses, the ones who run the big corporations, often get hung out to dry, really, in the press. I mean, that's part of the game, isn't it? Obviously, and Mark Zuckerberg's obviously gone through the ringer a few times in the last few years. He's not exactly the most popular person in the world, and Elon Musk has his fans, but he also has like probably even more critics and. Whereas I sort of feel Sam Altman, perhaps because he's a bit more obscure, I think. And
I think that's changed this week.
Yeah, maybe it has, but I still feel that the average man on the street might be confused if you went, "Who's Sam Altman?"
Well, it obviously hasn't got as big a profile as Zuckerberg or Musk.
And they know Mark Zuckerberg, and I think because he's not at the head of a company that's making God knows what in revenues each year. He's kind of come on the scene in the last 2 years, and I think some people are still a little bit oblivious to.
But people in the know, he's quite a big figure. He was
for sure.
He was a senior person at a very well-known tech incubator called Y Combinator.
In the sector, I know he is.
Yeah, but you're right. To the average Joe,
I mean, it's not that different. Like my dad, who's like I think a good proxy for all this stuff, would know who Mark Zuckerberg
but not Sam Altman.
And he'd probably even know who Tim Cook is, even though he's not as well known as Steve Jobs. But he wouldn't know who Sam Altman is, and he also probably wouldn't know actually who Jensen Huang is. No. I don't think.
We didn't know who Jensen Button is, though.
He'd know who Jensen Button is, though, and as there's only 2 people in the world called Jensen,
he'd probably go, "Is that Jensen Button's Korean brother?" No, that's not how names work, Dad.
And he's not Korean.
Isn't that?
I like the way that my dad's now got a Cockney accent.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
I always thought he's Korean. I thought Huang was a Korean
he's American,
name.
but I think he...
Yeah, he's American, but
he was born there.
But his name and ethnicity is obviously...
He'd say it with a northern accent, though, rather than a Cockney one, probably.
So it's Taiwan, not Korea? Okay, well, I got that one wrong. Sorry, Jensen.
No, the Korean name is like Park or...
Lee.
Kim. Yeah.
Lee and Kim and Park, yeah.
Huang is, I think he's Chinese.
Anyway.
Well, I'm talking shit.
I feel he's obviously not as well known, but I view him as quite a sinister figure.
Yeah, well, mate,
Sam Altman,
I haven't even got started on this on this bloke, so just sit tight. Here's some more stuff he said in his blog. Quote, "Although it'll happen incrementally, astounding triumphs, fixing the climate, just fixing it, establishing a space colony, and the discovery of all of physics. All of physics. There won't be one little bit where you go, what about that? No, AI. So all of physics includes the origin of the universe, for example.
Right, yeah.
So he's saying, I mean, this is completely off the charts utopian stuff.
Yeah, physics is basically God, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the language of God.
I guess there won't be a stock market anymore, because once you plug that into the stock market, you'll be like...
Yeah, because AI
will make all the great trades.
Well, I mean, presumably AI will be able to predict the future flawlessly as well.
Yeah.
There's nothing that this bloke thinks AI can't do. This bloke who happens to head up the most famous AI company in the fucking world.
Yeah.
So, let's take all this shit with a big pinch of salt.
Hey, what was it he wanted for OpenAI in funding? He threw out some
that was like $1 trillion.
It was like it was $1 trillion, I think, thrown out there.
Well, he gets into that.
I want to mine all the rare earth.
So he goes, with nearly limitless intelligence and abundant energy, we can do quite a lot. And I said, so the only thing...
have abundant energy.
Well, quite. So I said, so the only thing standing between our current grubby pedestrian existences and this AI paradise, we're told, is a dramatic reduction in the cost of chips that do all this AI processing, something PGIAI partner NVIDIA may have a different perspective on. And then there's the small matter of abundant energy at a time when the West is obsessed with arbitrary green targets.
On the energy point, I have to say, because I'm not one of these climate alarmists, but I do think the conversation about Gen AI and its impact on energy consumption is becoming quite scary in a way. I mean, you went back a couple of years and people were saying, it uses quite a lot of energy in data centers. These GPUs, they're quite sort of power hungry. And you look at the impact and, you run a data center and you could basically power a few homes for that period of time. And you look at it now, what they're saying. I mean, there was a big Economist piece on chips that they did in the last week's edition about what these data centers are basically getting through now. And it's outrageous. And what they're talking about in terms of the models they want to train. So the people like Sam Altman, what he wants to be able to do now in his pursuit of artificial general intelligence, which is basically the holy grail of AI. That's real AI.
Yep.
What we call AI is not AI. They've had to change the name.
AGI is Skynet.
AGI is what they've had to change it to because AI isn't really AI. AGI should just be AI, but
AI is just like quite a powerful search engine.
It's like 4G and 5G. AT&T or one of them jumped the gun, didn't it, and started calling it 5G.
Exactly.
Then you've got a problem. You have to sort of rebrand it. So they've had to rebrand AI AGI, but AGI is what he's trying to get to. And what this requires in terms of chips and processing power to train these models, because you're just throwing more and more data at them and they're becoming more and more energy hungry is absolutely outrageous. It's you look at all the capital expenditure by the big hyperscalers at the moment on these GPUs, and it's really quite frightening. And what they're getting through in energy each year is frightening. Now, they say they can do this in a kind of green way.
Yeah,
but,
right.
Well, I mean, there is an optimistic take on this, which is that if you throw that much money at something, and the companies themselves have a vested interest in trying to find energy efficient solutions to doing it,
accelerates progress.
that it would accelerate.
Yeah,
progress.
totally.
Yeah.
So 2 things I'll say about that. Firstly, I'm not an expert, and I could well be talking shit. But when you're talking about all the NVIDIA processing that's required to change to train LLMs, I don't know if that necessarily applies to AGI, artificial general intelligence, as we talk about it, because I think that's more of a paradigm shift, where it's beyond just training up on models and the fucking thing starts thinking for itself. But I
imagine you still have to throw a huge amount of processing capacity.
I'm sure, and they still has to be trained.
I mean, if you're talking about something that's even more like the human brain, then it doesn't sound like it's going to be
less processing. No, you're right.
Efficient thing.
Yeah, if you're creating the equivalent sort of neural network to the brain, which is still, I mean, we still don't really fucking understand how the brain works.
Well, this is why it won't happen, because the best the guys in the world who've been studying the human brain for years and years and years don't understand how the human brain works, which is the reason that
I don't know how my
won't
brain
happen.
works. That's for damn sure.
I think it's for the best that we don't know. No, as in, sorry, not your brain.
Oh,
that
right.
too,
I thought that was a cuss. I was like, all right.
I mean,
fuck you.
I mean the overall human brain.
Right.
It's more romantic that way,
Well, but then you start, and I'm certainly not going to go into this tangent now, but then you start getting into what is consciousness and free will and all that stuff. It gets into philosophical territory, which is fascinating. But one of my frustrations with philosophy, like I listened to a podcast where I think Rogan had a philosopher on, and eventually they just go down these whimsical blind alleys, and I get a bit irritated. Like, we haven't really got anywhere here, have we?
Yeah, but I think philosophy is really interesting, but you can go down whimsical blind alleys, but it can also lead you to interesting positions on things. And
make you reframe things and all that.
Yeah, and it's also been quite important in terms of important social movements have happened. Like the French Revolution was like, a lot of it was to do with the influence of people like Voltaire and Rousseau at the time. So it wasn't just about like monetary crisis and other
but that's more
France,
that's more political philosophy and that sort of thing.
But that's part of the same. Yeah, but it's still, man is born free and everywhere is in chains. It's very much a kind of human position. So,
and one.
I don't know what it is in the original French. Sorry, but
it's just that with an accent that sounds like Inspector Clouseau.
Wait, what's the sentence?
Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains.
Who was that?
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract.
Nice one. Fair play. I doff my hat to you for knowing that off the top of your head.
Well, the only reason I know is because I'm reading a book on the French Revolution at the moment.
Good stuff.
But I threw it in like as an example of philosophy because you were saying it can be whimsical, and we're getting way off topic here.
Okay, well, let me...
another great quote where you can force a man to carry a heavy rock, but you cannot make him paint a masterpiece or something like that. Isn't there a quote?
Maybe. Well, the Voltaire and Rousseau were the two biggies at the time in the 1780s.
Yeah.
So,
before they started wearing berets and smoking in cafes.
And no trousers.
No, wasn't Rousseau like powdered wig kind of era?
Yeah. Oh, who was I thinking of? Sartre, probably.
That's Jean-Paul.
That's much later.
Much later, yeah. That's the beret era.
You should have a beret era.
What was I going to say? So, just one other thing I want to say while we're talking about AGI. He doesn't actually use that word. He uses superintelligence, but I think superintelligence is his euphemism for AGI.
Yeah.
And he gets his one paragraph. This is his own.
I think Jensen
blog.
Huang's more into the AGI reference.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, because I think they're wise to be very careful about it, because people like me, and I think there are plenty of other people like me on this, start getting freaked out.
The trouble is, why wouldn't you get freaked out? It shouldn't be a desirable thing for anybody.
But Sam Altman thinks we should just embrace it and just look forward to this fucking tech utopia.
The way so you talk about philosophers. There's a guy called Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah.
He
writes quite utopian
Homo
stuff.
sapiens and
Homo Deus. Yeah.
So he's very much into AI. He's an AI philosopher, if you like.
He's also like a World Economic Forum stooge.
What? Yeah, I mean, his books are brilliant. I think I've read a couple of his books, but he's very he can be a bit of a scaremonger. He's very opposed to the the actual pushing of AI in this way.
Oh, right. So
okay. No,
I thought he was more utopian.
He's definitely on this. No, he's dystopian. His whole vision of the future.
Well, I take it back. Sorry, Yuval.
So his whole thing about AI is that you're basically inviting an alien life force into the world.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why would you want a form of intelligence to be superior to yours? If you look at the way
Sam Altman thinks so that it can take care of everything and you can just chill out.
So he would use Yuval Noah Harari as an example. He would look at, if you look at the way that higher forms of intelligence treat lower forms of intelligence, it's not something that you wouldn't sign up to having a higher form of intelligence above you.
Totally.
Because we don't treat lower forms of intelligence very well. So
were you trying to say something, mate?
Sorry.
No, it's like there's two ways of seeing it. It's either enhancing, which is what someone was saying, or to me, or
taking over,
replacing.
Exactly.
We don't need you anymore.
And so this is it. I actually asked my colleague Armita to write a deep dive on this, on basically weighing up the arguments of the utopians and the dystopians. And obviously those are the two extremes, but that's a good starting point. And then you try and find what is the, what have you got the thesis, the antithesis, and then you're looking for the synthesis in the middle.
Yeah,
that's what you're looking for. There's two polar extremes. Where's the ideal sort of equilibrium, the balance between the two of them?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've asked her to write about that, so keep your eyes peeled on Telecoms.com for that. I just want to read out one more little paragraph from Altman's blog. After he's gone on about how great everything's going to be and robots will wipe your ass for you and all that sort of thing.
See, I wouldn't mind that. This is the problem with AI, though.
I wouldn't mind that, Scott.
It's good at... Well, actually, go and say your thing first.
Okay. So then he goes, this may turn out to, this is the kind of language he uses. This may turn out to be the most consequential fact about all of history so far.
So he's not sort of...
He's not downplaying it. He goes, it's possible that we will have superintelligence in a few thousand days, brackets, exclamation mark. It may take longer, but I'm confident we'll get there. So a few thousand days, so that's as little as 3 years.
Yeah.
So that's...
Well, I think Jensen Huang was saying 2028, wasn't he, for his vision of AGI becoming a thing, which I thought was a bit ridiculous.
Very imminent.
I thought that was a bit ridiculous, frankly.
I think all of this is very hyperbolic, but they all seem to reckon that we're going to get there, I don't know, within a decade or so, and that's pretty fucking ominous.
It is ominous. I mean, you'll only be 60 then, Scott. You still have years
in a
ahead
decade,
of
I'll be 62.
Years ahead of you in robot servitude.
Well, actually, it might come along just at the time where I really do need something to wipe my ass.
Yeah, but maybe you'll be wiping its ass. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
No. I think while we're going down the dystopian rabbit hole, we'll have a long period of being lulled into a full sense of security where we still feel like we're calling the shots.
Yeah.
Just like in Terminator, where the humans think they're in charge of Skynet until it flips.
The problem then is that what he's come up with is not superintelligence. If he comes up with something that's super intelligent, implying it's higher than a human level of intelligence, then it won't be wiping our asses. I can guarantee it. No form of super intelligence is going to go around. We don't wipe cows' asses and do their bidding as little slaves for them.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at the
work for us.
Just Wikipedia, which I know is not the authority on everything, but I just googled superintelligence, and it says a superintelligence is a hypothetical agent that possesses intelligence surpassing that of the brightest and most gifted human minds.
Right, there you are. Well, you just got that from me. Why'd you have to look it up on Wikipedia?
Well, I just wanted the generally accepted definition, that's all. Not that I question you at all, mate. Because you are that brightest.
I'm obviously the authority on AI.
Well, you're that brightest and most gifted human mind that they're referring to. In fact, it's got a hyperlink to a portrait of you in Wikipedia.
Yeah, I know how I get treated by more intelligent humans, and it isn't very well, frankly. So
fucking patronising, isn't it?
So, what's it going to be like with robots?
Well, quite. So there's all that, and then
the movies. It doesn't end well.
No.
And
it ends well for us, though.
And so both of those things just led me. That's why I spoke about utopian propaganda, because you got America going, it's all about fucking global inclusivity, which I don't believe for 1 second. You got Sam Altman going, it's all going to be brilliant.
Yeah.
All we got to do is do more of it. And then
just take my word for it.
Yeah, just you don't worry about it. And Sam Altman, so my second piece that I wrote yesterday was the headline was OpenAI increasingly looks like a messianic one-man band, and that's what Sam Altman comes over as messianic.
Haven't a load of people left?
Well, this is the story,
right?
But he comes over as messianic, by which I mean, messianic's obviously the etymology is from Messiah, and he comes over, and his tone is very much like, "Look, I've got this.
Yeah.
You just relax. I've got this. I'm going to make the world a better place. You just chill out. It's all under control."
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think so.
Is he going to get crucified then?
Do you know what I mean? Well, he has been verbally. And so this second piece I wrote, I started by saying, in an X post, i.e. Twitter, Sam Altman published an internal email, quote, "When Mira informed me this morning that she was leaving, I was saddened, but of course I support her decision," he wrote, referring to OpenAI CTO Mira Murati, who had announced her departure from the company on X late yesterday. By the way, anyone who thinks that X has become irrelevant since Elon Musk took over is talking shit. It's still where people announce stuff.
Well, she probably announced it in a few places, to be honest.
Well, honestly, X is where it broke.
Right. I mean, she's a techie person, though. So
I guess so. But politicians often do stuff on X first as well. It's still there. Anyway, that's fine. You're obviously pushing back on my defense.
No, I feel it's not quite as relevant as it was, but
a lot of people say the user experience has deteriorated.
Yeah.
But a lot of these people are sort of pro censorship.
By the way, I don't necessarily link the more when I say I think it's become less relevant, I think that had already started to happen before Elon Musk took over. I just think it's kind of social media fatigue to some extent.
Yeah, it's a nasty place.
That kind of social media.
I could never be active on it.
Oh, for sure.
Horrible
it was
place.
nasty before he took over. It's nasty since he took over.
But it's nasty because it's populated by people, sadly.
It's populated by people just coughing things
bots
at each other.
Well, yeah, and bots, that's a good point.
Yeah, but just sort of coming out with these... The whole design of it is for you to come out with little outbursts.
Yes.
And
you're right.
That doesn't...
The social engineering is all geared towards...
hiding.
It doesn't lend itself to super intelligent debate, one might say, Scott.
If only Sam Altman was in charge of it, then it would be better.
It's like you look at Twitter for 10 minutes and then you look out the window, you're like, well, it's not that bad out the window.
Do you know what I mean?
What does it make?
Birds are tweeting.
Yeah.
Even this week where the weather's been fucking biblically foul.
The world is ending and then you look at the window, like, people are...
It's all right.
Yeah.
And also, like, you see people constantly having spats and jibing at each other, and then you have a conversation. I mean, this even applies. I have this with my mates. Most of our correspondence is on instant messaging, on Signal, and we'll sometimes kick off and be, if not foul to each other, quite abrasive. And then we meet up in the pub and talk about exactly the same thing, and it's all really convivial, and all that sort of thing. So the medium is a bad one. But anyway, we digress. So her tweet or her ex was, "I'm stepping."
Is that what they're called now?
Yeah.
Is that what we call them? We call them X's. The actual messages themselves.
I don't know. No, I've been calling them tweets, but I'm partly.
So he didn't think this through, I don't think, Elon Musk.
Well, exactly. I'm partly leaning into the absurdity of it.
What?
You X'd something.
I've read your ex. What do you mean you've read my ex?
Well, I even used it as a verb. I said later on in it, I said someone X'd. Anyway, and she goes, what did she say? Hold on, I've scrolled past it. "I'm stepping away because I want to create the time and space to do my own exploration." And so I said at the end of that, "It's not you, it's me," which is my paraphrase.
Exploration.
Yes, exploration. She did put an E before it. She missed a trick there. And then I said, but that wasn't the only departure Altman had to lament in his email. Quote, "I also want to share that Bob and Barrett have decided to depart OpenAI," he added.
Bob and Barrett?
Bob and Barrett. I know, it sounds like a chemist chain or something. And he goes, he was referring to Chief Research Officer Bob McGrew, who said on X that, quote, "It's time for me to take a break," close quote, and VP of Research Barrett Zoff, PH, who X'd. "This is a personal decision based on how I want to evolve the next phase of my career." And Altman himself had said, what was it?
Zoff. I mean, he sounds sinister, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Maybe it's good that he's
Dr.
out of
Zoff.
it. We don't need him and Sam Altman.
It could be
together.
Zoff.
Yeah.
And Altman, again, this is partly the broader narrative about how shifty all this stuff is, but also it's me I just love picking apart public communication because there's nearly always hidden meaning. And he goes, "Mira, Bob and Barrett made all these decisions independently of each other."
So it sounds like a 70s group, Mira, Bob and Barrett.
Yeah. Mirror Bob and Betty, yeah, some kind of like flower power.
Daniel
band.
Local scene. Yeah, it sounds like the sort of band my dad was in back before I was born.
It could be a horse name as well.
Yeah, they were like a support act at Woodstock. Made these decisions independently of each other and amicably. He's really labouring the point. But the timing of Mira's decisions was such that it made sense now to do this all at once. So not independently of each other then. So that we can work together, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and I just said, sarkily, as has been my mood this week, I said, what an amazing coincidence that all three independently decided, oh shit, found a typo. Decided suddenly felt. Yes. All three independently suddenly felt, that decided shouldn't be there, suddenly felt such a strong need for more me time on exactly the same day. Even more so that their independent messaging corresponded so closely with that of their former boss. So in other words, and there have been other people that left, like there's God knows how you pronounce his name properly, Ilya Sutskever, something like that. He was like one of the founders and the chief boffin.
Yeah.
He left a little while ago. And I don't know if you remember, a year ago, there was this weird sort of coup where they got rid of Sam Altman for a day.
That's right.
Until Microsoft stepped in and went, okay, we're taking care of business.
Yeah.
And reinstated it.
Well, I mean, here's the interesting thing. Now that OpenAI's lost all these key people, it seems, and it's left with just Sam Altman, is he that good? I mean, is it going to be like,
well,
Roger Waters on his own without David Gilmour and
I think that's exactly the right
Rick
question
Wright
to ask. I agree entirely. I mean, how good can he be? Which is why I went with the headline that OpenAI increasingly looks like a messianic one-man band.
Yeah.
And so, yes.
He has the password to the core,
Yeah, he's got the password. And at the same time, Pierre, as you mentioned earlier, there was a story that broke, I think, on Reuters that that they're thinking of moving it to a for-profit model. So OpenAI, as the name sort of slightly implies, was originally set up as a not-for-profit.
Yeah.
And just to sort of...
Well, that was just silly, wasn't it?
Well, yeah.
To be honest with you. I mean, it's not a charity, is it? Come on.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how these profit and non-profit
not for profit
paradigms work.
I think some of them lives in a two-bed apartment, yeah. Two-bedroom.
Anyway, now
he's like Mother Teresa, is he?
Yeah. Now that Microsoft's bought a big chunk of it,
not a good comparison, given Christopher Hitchens sort of takedown of her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Now that Microsoft's basically in charge of OpenAI, because it really stepped in when that thing happened a year ago, they were like, "Here's our opportunity to just buy up more of it and just install ourselves."
Yeah,
but they only own like 49.9% of it, so they don't have to say that they own it. I'm sure it's a bit less than that, but they own a significant minority chunk. But yeah, they're going to focus on profit in order to improve returns for investors. Microsoft chief among them, I said. And also Altman himself is apparently going to get a chunk of equity.
Right.
So
it's basically about money.
Well, yes. And so I think, and I'm certainly not the only one to make this conjecture, that the freak out a year ago seemed to be about Altman pushing too hard towards AGI, or superintelligence as he seems to insist on calling it, and people there who are a bit more reticent about that going, hold on a fucking minute, and him going, no, I'm not going to hold on.
Right.
And this Ilya Sutskever...
Can I just... That raises an interesting point in itself.
Go on.
Why do you think that people there might have been reticent about it? Because they thought that it wasn't on the kind of technical
Safety
track that they were on, or because of ethical concerns?
I think it's primarily the latter.
Yeah,
I know, I get you.
I think a lot of these people don't. My position on these scientists, a lot of them, and the kind of AI engineers, is that they don't think too much about the ethical concerns. They think that's somebody else's business, and what we want to do is try and do what we can. And
I think that's a reasonable hypothesis, but my gut feel is some of them really do.
Right.
I think publicly that's what they said, right?
But the other weird thing is that if some of them said they do, it implies that they thought it was a realistic thing in itself.
To achieve AGI.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were worried about achieving it without sufficient guardrails.
Right.
That's my feeling. But your scepticism's perfectly valid, and you could well be right.
The point you made earlier was really interesting when you were saying that what we've got at the moment, generative AI and the other forms of it that are older than that, machine learning and all this stuff, is very much about, well, generative AI very much about kind of pattern recognition, bombarding something with a lot of information so that eventually it recognises how to put words together and produce
And in
something.
principle, you could bombard it with every conceivable permutation.
Yeah, and I think
but it's still not thinking for itself.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know too much about the science of it, but from what I've read that people write about it, is that only goes so far, and at the end of the day, it still doesn't understand causality and it still can't reason, which are the kind of two key tenets of the key tenets of human intelligence. Therefore, to have AGI, which is basically what you were saying a minute ago with your stuff about maybe it won't require the same processing power. It's a completely different track. It's not what these guys have been
100%.
doing. It's got nothing to do with it, arguably. You need to have somebody else. Maybe it's a brain surgeon actually who knows how to sort of transfer some of this stuff to.
Or maybe Musk, who's doing all this Neuralink stuff.
Neuralink stuff. Maybe it's got nothing to do with that. So I'm just speculating here that maybe some of their concerns weren't ethical. They were thinking,
could be.
This is bullshit. He's talking nonsense. This AGI stuff that he's trying to do isn't what we've been doing, and it's not the path to go down.
So the only thing we can say with a greater degree of confidence is that there seems to have been a fundamental disagreement over precisely what is hard to say.
Yeah,
I will conjecture that it's over safety. Part of the reason I think this is because this guy Ilya Sutskever, who was one of the main dudes, left in May. He left OpenAI and formed a company called Safe Superintelligence.
Right.
Now, whether or not that's him just doing the same bit of sugarcoating and he's just as much of a moustache-twirling supervillain, I don't know. But
it does sound like he was highlighting the ethical side.
Exactly. That's the superficial interpretation of that move that he made.
So he's going to do it, but it's going to be ethical.
It's going to be safe. Because it's in the fucking name.
Because of course, if it's super intelligent, it's always going to be safe, isn't it? It's never going to work out a way not to be safe if it's super intelligent.
Well, I mean, that's the brilliant thing about it. Unfortunately, we've got other things to talk about, and we've been banging on, chiefly me. So I'm certainly not pointing the finger at you for so long that we can't go down that rabbit hole fully. But it's a fascinating rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because is safe AGI even possible?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, how do you install guardrails?
These Asimovian principles of robotics, isn't it? The three laws.
Right, yeah. Remind us of what those are.
I can't remember. Someone would have to look it up on the computer and it would come up with them really quickly. But they're like, I cannot allow harm to come to a human, I can't harm a human, and all this stuff. It's like these...
Are you looking up?
Safety measures, these three laws of robotics.
Three laws of robotics.
Have you found them?
Yeah, so the first one is the robot must not injure a human or allow harm to come to a human through inaction. And then the second one,
big grey area, isn't it?
Yeah, as in if the human is about to step off a ledge, the whole robot has to save him and stop him.
Yeah, but what I mean, and this is a typical thing that comes up. Sorry to butt in, but if one human's about to harm another one, on which side does the robot intervene? It's all these little dilemmas.
Okay, yeah. So
some of his stories about.
The second law is a robot must obey human orders unless doing so conflicts with the first law. So you can ask the robot to throw you off a ledge. Yep. And then third law, a robot must protect its own existence unless doing so conflicts with the first and second law.
Yeah.
But I mean,
so he's thought about it quite carefully.
That's the theme in the
first law,
which is obviously based on the original, like Isaac Asimov stuff, which is a lot more thoughtful. Although I didn't mind that movie, I thought it was actually all right.
Which was that?
iRobot.
Yeah, I remember that.
But
Will Smith, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was. I mean, it's like very narrowly sort of.
Did Will Smith slap any of the robots in the face?
But I think he did. Yeah, because he didn't like them. He was like.
That's where he got his training for the Oscars.
Spoiler alert! I think in the movie, the scientist at the beginning dies.
That's right.
He falls off a window.
Yeah.
And I think you find out later that he asked the robot to throw him through the window, and he did, which is confusing with his laws.
Well, but that's back to my point about the first law. He probably said to the robot, if you don't throw me off the window, something worse will happen. So he's having to make these moral equivalent judgments all the time.
But there's a good book by David Mitchell, who wrote Cloud Atlas, one of my favourite books. But he wrote another book called Ghost Written, where there's a DJ having a conversation with someone who phones in, who ultimately turns out is an AI. And the conversation they're having is about like justifications for nuclear war and this kind of thing, and whether the human race is really ethical. And he thinks he's talking to a person about these kind of big philosophical ideas, but he's basically giving this super AI a kind of rationale for thinking about the way it should approach the human race. And is it, and it ends up with it trying to trigger a super intelligence is going to look at laws like that and think, hang on a minute, are these laws appropriate for me? They're not going to be bound by them in the same way that people don't want to be bound by the laws of a state sometimes, because they see it as a form of control. So the whole idea of safe super intelligence it's a bit of an oxymoron, to be honest.
Yes, I think so. And your point about what you said immediately before that totally plays into pretty much all of my political philosophy, which is any concentration of power needs to be viewed with deep suspicion, even if, and it normally is, the premise for that concentration of power is benign. Like, let's give people more power in order to do good.
Yeah.
The problem is twofold. Firstly, there's no guarantee that they will do the good that they promise to do. And secondly, once you give them the power, it's very hard to take it away again. So any time power is imparted, and in this case, it's giving it to a machine rather than a politician or whatever.
Yeah.
You need to be like, well, can we ever take that power back? I mean, Tony Benn, not a politician in a lot of ways I align with.
Very principled, though.
Very principled. And he had a brilliant rules about power. He's like, how did you get it? How do we take it away from you? And all that sort of thing. He had these little sort of Isaac Asimov type of rules.
I've got a lot of respect for Tony Benn. He's not a politician whose core ideas I would go along with.
He's a socialist,
incredibly
which I'm not.
principled politician.
Incredibly principled, very bright, and was basically just suspicious of power.
Yeah.
As you should be, as the founding principles of America, by the way. We're here. I'm going to say something nice about America.
He'd be a good podcast guest.
Yeah, he would, especially as he's been dead for about 20 years. But the founding principles.
Bring Tony Benn back through the power of AI.
Yeah, and George Washington while you're at it.
Yeah.
And then we can have a chat. Can have a chat about power, because the American Declaration of Independence and Constitution and all those founding documents were basically all founded on power is always going to get dodgy.
Yeah.
So we've got to find ways of limiting it and distributing it and diluting it and all that sort of thing. And so that's a circuitous way of going back and perhaps concluding this, because we've got other things we need to talk about and we've banged on for a while.
I've got one thought
go on
before we move off AI, because I've just realised I actually wrote loads of pieces on AI this week.
And we haven't even come up.
I mean, I wrote a big piece because there's this whole Verizon job cuts thing that happened a few.
We haven't even talked about the Dell thing either, have we?
Weeks ago, yeah. I don't think we're going to get onto that, to be honest. But the 4,800 cuts that Verizon announced in a SEC filing a couple of weeks ago, which prompted me to go, because I've been writing about job cuts at AT&T and Verizon for years, and this one, for some reason, I think because they put it in an SEC filing and talked about what it's going to cost them in severance cuts, got a lot of attention. And I did a big piece on why their workforce has gone down so much, basically, in the last sort of 10 years. I mean, if you look at it from the start of the century, those two companies together used to employ nearly 500,000 people.
Wow.
Do you know what they employ now? It's less than 250,000. So it's basically halved in the last kind of 20 years or something. Right. The workforce. That's it's like 250,000 people who used to work for those two operators.
We've just got to find something else.
I mean, there's been lots of restructuring of the market, obviously, and spin-offs and things like that in those days. But the cuts that have happened in the last 6-7 years have been really dramatic. And obviously a lot of this gets linked to things like automation and AI. And I got to thinking about some of the conversations we've been involved in with people like Harmeen Mehta, and I talked to her about this, and Scott Petty, and people pushing back against the idea that AI will have an impact on jobs. And this is one thing she was saying when I did my interview with her when she was still in the role, about the impact that AI will have on the workforce. They're very much positioning it as a tool that we use. Now, AGI, obviously, is much more worrying if people are
much more than a tool.
But even, I think...
It might behave like a tool.
Yeah, even generative AI, I still have an issue with this idea. And you were talking about this wiping your ass, they're getting a robot to wipe your ass. And so I remember Scott Petty saying at a press conference when I think I or someone else was asking about the cost savings you can realise from workforce reduction. He's very much of the view that, which tends to get pushed out a lot by technology executives, that it's a tool for you to use in the same way that a spreadsheet is, or
it's just a productivity tool. That's all it is.
It's a productivity tool, and it allows you.
Like our guest last week said, you can do PowerPoint presentations really easily.
Presentations really easily. It allows you to focus on the things that are higher value. It frees up your time to do the things that are more worthwhile to you. And the problem I have with that is, if you look at where generative AI is going, the things it tends to be very good at doing are what people might call the higher value things. Yeah, it's very good at writing music or putting sonnets together, as I think we tested on this podcast a few weeks ago. It's much better than people would expect it to be.
The music? Not really.
It's much better than people would expect it to be.
No, it is.
It's a much better, I'll tell you what it is. It's a much better of writer of music and sonnets than it is a toilet cleaner, or a maker of coffee. Or even trying to do a basic, I want these numbers in this Excel spreadsheet organised like this, and I'm trying to do that with it, is something that probably requires a human at the moment, because you're trying to understand what you're trying to get out of it.
Yes, because the reason it can write a sonnet or a piece of classical music is it's basically mashing up existing shit.
Yeah. But the problem is that...
It's getting a bunch of Beethoven and Mozart and putting it through some Gen AI little mixer and then coming out with something, quote, new.
That may be, but the point is that it's doing things that people who use you for your job will say, well, it's capable of doing.
Good enough.
I'm not saying maybe we're going to end up with the best version of Mozart in the world in the future. But from a commercial perspective, a company's going to say some of these AI systems are actually very, very good at doing the higher value stuff. And what happens when, even before we get to the level of AGI,
I know where you're going with this,
where Scott Petty's saying, someone like Scott Petty, and I don't want to keep bringing him up, it sounds like I'm going after him.
But he has been quite pro AI.
He's pro AI, but he's not pro the idea that AI takes jobs.
No, as a productivity tool.
As a productivity tool. He thinks it's a tool. He
likes a bit of Copilot, doesn't he?
Yeah, exactly. But the issue for me is, it's all very well for people to say there are other tasks that people can focus on. But at some point, well before we get to the point of AGI, generative AI will be able to do those tasks as well. Yeah. A lot of these tasks are tasks that generative AI can do. The tasks it's not very good at doing are things like cleaning the table.
Yeah.
Well, that's because it's more like a physical thing. Yeah.
Well,
we're not good at making robots yet.
Robots we're not very good at making. We're much better at doing a software system that can do some of these cognitive things.
So I think what you're trying to say is human beings will be relegated to bog cleaners and the computers will do all the fun stuff. That's exactly what
I'm trying to say.
But, you said like all he does is, listens to Mozart and Beethoven in a split second and then does something.
Yeah.
So I had this conversation with a friend of mine. It's like, the cave allegory, Descartes.
Plato's cave.
Yeah, so imagine if you had a human being in a cave for 15 years from birth, nobody interacts with him. He's somehow fed, he or she. And then at 15, you give them a piano. He's never seen or heard one before. Would he, after a while, or she, create a piece of music?
Well, you'd have to pump a lot of data into their brain.
From thin air. No, as in can a human being just somehow create music from thin air? Because that's what,
of course,
all the artists that we know, they've all listened to others and then subconsciously somehow made their own stuff.
This is the argument that actually pattern recognition gets you a long way, yeah? It gets you far enough to be able to do
It's just that with AI, we know that's what it's doing, but with the human, we're not quite sure.
Well, I think we know that with the human, that the idea of practice makes perfect is basically pattern recognition, isn't it? You hit a tennis ball often enough. After a while, you figure out how to do it well.
You're talking about being good at music. I'm talking about creating a new piece of music.
Sure, but if you're gonna look at it, how far does pattern recognition in terms of coming up with something original? The music that might be produced by a Gen AI system is original in the sense that it's put a bunch of notes together in a way perhaps that hasn't been put together like that before, but it's taking other music as an influence. But maybe that's not that different from the way a human does it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But the thing is, I think the fact that with AI we're 100% sure that it's not an influence, that's how it knows. Where with a human we're like, that sounds a bit like this song, but we don't know if that person.
I think it's the big
song.
breakthroughs as well. It's someone like Jimi Hendrix turning a guitar upside down and playing it the wrong way, or Einstein coming up with the theory of relativity. Those big kind of seismic shifts that you get, that people have suddenly had some kind of breakthrough moment. Nobody's seen anything like that from Gen AI at all. You were just saying it isn't that good at music, it isn't that good at science. It's good enough, but it's not come up with a new style of writing like James Joyce or something. It's not been able to do.
Well, Sam Altman reckons that's just a matter of time.
Well, that's probably what he's talking about with his super intelligence.
It's only as good as the prompt you give it, which is going to be coming from a human. So a human is going to make this song in that style. Because it only knows.
Yeah, for sure.
What if you create a new style?
Do you know what Stefan last week on the pod said that? He said, you've actually got to train yourself for how best to get the best out of Gen AI.
Yeah.
You've got to ask it the right questions. Because if you just go, Gen AI, sort my life out, that's too broad.
Or like ask Gen AI in the let's say the 1940s, create a song in the style of reggae. You'd be like, I don't know what reggae is. It doesn't exist yet.
I mean, I feel I have better things to do than train myself to use AI better. I really do. That's pretty. How dare
you think you're superior to AI?
Get
back in your box.
What your aspiration is in life is to work out how better to give commands to AI.
Let's start a 12-part workshop. How to give better prompts.
How to be a better ally to AI.
I mean, this is a school of thought, though, that and actually, it's probably would get you a job at some companies. It's
a lot of
like
companies.
I'm an expert
people
prompter.
who use GitHub Copilot need to know how to tell the AI to do something the right way. You can't just go in without any knowledge of programming.
Can't say write a new database.
Right, and you could probably give it the right amount of prompts to get you a brilliant essay out of the day on the French Revolution, but you probably need to know some of the basic information about
or just puke out everything it knows.
Yeah.
All right, look, we really better move it on. Sorry that we didn't get to talk about more about some of the stuff you've written about.
You need to have even the taste to recognize that when you read what it gave you, that it's even good at all. You know what I mean?
Well, that's subjective, isn't it?
It is, but taste is important. I don't know.
One other thing I'm going to say, Pierre.
I'm going to say more something that appeals to Pierre.
In half an hour's time, when you're tapping at your wrist and saying, I need to get home, I'm going to remind you of your interventions. Not that I don't welcome them.
It's just fascinating.
Because I think it is fascinating and I'd be happy to go on for longer. But Pierre wants to call it a day in half an hour.
This is the least telecom-y podcast we've ever had.
Yeah.
It's only the mention of Scott Petty that's made it and Harmin Mehta that's made it telecom relevant.
But I think that's one of the fun things about when it's just us two.
Yeah.
We can be more self-indulgent.
We can. And
when we've got a guest, obviously we're constrained by their core area of interest. Whereas we can just fucking go off on like Plato's cave and shit. Anyway, however, having said that, let's move it on eventually to the second topic. And I'm going to hand it over to you, not least because I've been banging on far too much. Talk about Deutsche Telekom and Meta and why they're getting on each other's tits.
Yeah, so they've... I mean, it's pretty heated actually between Deutsche Telekom and Meta at the moment in Germany. This is the old fair share, fair contribution, whatever you want to call it, dispute raising its head again. Having gone quiet for a long time, having actually been a bit of a theoretical thing. I think this is actually it in practice.
Right, I see.
Because what's happened is apparently some Cologne court has sided with Deutsche Telekom in this dispute, which I find interesting, considering that the regulatory authorities are often don't seem to agree with the operators on their position on fair share and fair contribution.
Yeah, but this is a German versus a Yank, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, this just shows the morass of structures that you have in place, I suppose, that can get involved in decision making because they're not part of BEREC, this Cologne court. They're not taking their guidance, obviously, from European regulators, but they've. What's essentially happened is Deutsche Telekom wants to be able to charge Meta, formerly known as Facebook, to interconnect with it in Germany.
They keep rebranding the bastards.
And it wants Meta to pay basically to be able to send traffic.
So it's very much a branch of the fair contribution.
It's exactly the fair contribution. So it wants Meta to be paying to, as it puts it, by the way, send traffic to Deutsche Telekom customers in Germany.
So it's the push versus pull thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's come out with this big state because this Cologne court's come out and basically taken its side in this dispute that yes, it should be able to get money from Meta for sending traffic to Deutsche Telekom customers in Germany, and it's come out with this big thing on its website about Meta. This shows Meta's not above the law, blah 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 blah. Meta obviously doesn't want to do this, and it's retaliated by. You have two systems basically when in the world of kind of interconnection in the kind of internet world. You have something called peering, which is like a direct link between the two parties. So Facebook's traffic going to Deutsche Telekom's customers over the most sort of straightforward route imaginable. It's like if you walk through the town centre to the pub, you go straight up the middle of the road.
Yep.
That's peering.
Okay.
And the alternative is to do a transit arrangement, which basically does a kind of roundabout route to get there. So it's like you go out into the woods.
And why would you do that?
Well, if something like this happens, if there's some kind of problem with a peering arrangement, the two companies.
So it's a diversion. It's
it's like a diversion to get there almost.
Yeah, it's going.
And what they've done is
going around the obstacle.
It's going around. So they're basically using third party companies to which they would be paying for, by the way, as well. I think with transit.
Right.
They would be paying to have a third party sort of find the most optimal route to eventually get to Deutsche Telekom's customers, which is what they've done. And they've sort of complained about having to do this and said that it's very unfair that Deutsche Telekom's come out with this kind of edict that it needs to, that it needs to pay for sending traffic to Deutsche Telekom customers in Germany. And it's like to me, it's almost the first time this thing's really kind of raised its head in a kind of practical sense.
Yeah.
It's like a real
substantial,
kind of, because
way.
and then it kind of raises a question of what happens next, because there's this the most interesting thing to me about this was Deutsche Telekom both of them have suggested that if this doesn't get resolved, there could be some kind of impact on service quality. And both of them have kind of blamed the other one for that possible impact that comes on service quality. And you can sort of see Deutsche Telekom, I think, being a little bit concerned about the perception that it's, that it's maybe blocking or throttling traffic. If there's any kind of impact on the services that a person can receive if they're a Deutsche Telekom customer. It's wanting to deflect the criticism.
Yeah,
I think.
Because if you're a DT subscriber and your Facebook experience is shit, and you feel inclined to blame them for it,
and it potentially could have an impact, I guess, on service quality if Facebook is suddenly, or Meta as it prefers to be called nowadays, is suddenly having to route its traffic through a kind of non-optimal route.
And why is it doing that? To avoid this
situation of having to pay Deutsche Telekom. I mean, it's quite an easy. It's interesting that it's Meta that's kind of the target. I kind of feel that Meta and Netflix have become the easy scapegoats in a way in this dispute for the.
But
telcos.
they are probably responsible for a lot of the data traffic.
They're responsible for a lot of the data traffic, but unlike Amazon and
but
Google,
YouTube's probably the biggest.
Right. So what's the difference? What's the big difference between Amazon and Google via YouTube and Netflix and Meta? I think the big difference, and actually we had Dennis O'Brien on the pod almost saying it, is that the Netflixes and the Metas don't provide any kind of cloud computing infrastructure or software tools to the telcos.
Okay. So which kind of sugars the pill a bit?
Well, I just think they're less. Deutsche Telekom would be less ready to come out with some big stormy, like "you're not above the law" headline about a company like Google that it uses for data center.
Right. So you're saying if you're a public cloud giant, of which there are only 3, then that complicates the political
complicates matters.
Yeah. No, fair enough. And if Dennis O'Brien said that, who am I to question his?
I mean, all the stuff about peering and transit's all very interesting, but what it basically gets down to is this argument about who pays for data traffic. That's essentially what they're talking about. Most of these peering arrangements.
Has your position changed on that at all?
Not really. I did go into the weeds a little bit and read a little bit more about sort of peering and transit. I mean, peering, which is this kind of most direct point, you have these autonomous systems that will line up.
Autonomous.
Yeah, I mean, it's not AI.
No.
It's just like you ensure that the data can travel on the most optimal route. And most of those peering arrangements, which get done between very big companies like Meta and Deutsche Telekom, are settlement free. Like, there's not a payment that happens. If there were a payment that happens, I guess the operators wouldn't be making a fuss about this in the first place.
Yeah, that's kind of what
that's basically what the point
agitating
is.
for.
And you could look at it, and if you read Deutsche Telekom's blog, and you could, if you don't really know the ins and outs of this, you could sort of be sympathetic to what they're saying. You could go, well, hang on a minute. Yes, Meta is a generator, if you want to look at it from Deutsche Telekom's perspective, of a huge amount of data traffic. All this Instagram video stuff, and people are on their phones all the time consuming it. It's up there in the top 10 of kind of, if you're looking at those charts on gigabit consumption, it's one of the sites that people are going to. Yeah. It's all one flow. It's all going in that direction. There's nothing coming the other way. And Deutsche Telekom's the unfortunate kind of company that has to, maintain the networks and pay for all this stuff on the other side. So doesn't it have a point that if there's a cost involved in this, and there obviously is some kind of cost involved in it, shouldn't it be Meta that kind of stumps up some of the money for it. But the problem with looking at it that way, this idea of traffic flows in one direction, the problem with looking at it that way is I think what the operators are trying to do, they're suggesting essentially that the content companies are the sort of originators of this stuff. And really, the people who are the originators are not the content companies; they're the customers of Deutsche Telekom.
Quite.
It's people like
it's the push versus pull thing.
It's the push, completely. And obviously, the best example to give is a kind of calling party pay system. You know, like if you make a telephone call to a friend, you would pay for that call in the old-fashioned telephony world because you're the person who originates the call. It's you who picks up the...
And then you get, like back in the days, you'd get a collect call or what did we used to call it in the UK?
Call. So, well,
reverse
collect calls are always in
like
1980s movies where some impoverished student phones up his dad and it's like a collect call to the...
But that's where the operator has to go, he's ringing you, are you prepared to pay for it?
Yeah, exactly.
He's too skint.
But if that doesn't happen, then it's generally the case that
reverse charges, I think we used to call it in the UK.
But it's, generally speaking, if you pick up the phone and push the buttons... You're the person who's demanding the traffic.
Yeah, you're initiating it.
You're initiating it. So the equivalent, and this is BEREC's position on it, by the way. BEREC is the body of European regulators for the European whatever, something like that. And BEREC's position is that the person who's the equivalent of the calling party pays in this ecosystem, in this kind of internet world, is
the consumer
person pushing a link on their smartphone to get
that's
that
how the internet
traffic.
Works.
That's how the internet works.
No one's forcing, no one's pushing any web pages onto you. You're always requesting.
If nobody's interested in getting any Facebook videos, then Facebook costs nothing for the ISP. But if lots of people are doing it, then there's a cost for the ISP to bear. How does the ISP recoup that cost? It charges its customers. You pay to push the button. That's your internet.
And there we get onto the problem of the CSP, the consumer service provider, communication service provider business model, which is that it's unmetered.
It's unmetered, but what they're trying to do is this kind of double pay system that they're trying to implement, which is essentially what it is. It's already been paid for, but we want somebody to pay for it on the other side as well. It's a calling and received parties paid system that they essentially want. As they're trying to implement this because basically their revenues are flatlined and they're quite envious of the internet giants making a lot of money.
And one bit of sympathy I'll give to them is they're thinking they got so much fucking money, why can't they give us a bit of it?
They look at them the way
they're basic socialists. Tony Benn would approve of.
Pinata that you can whack with a stick, and get some.
Just get a little bit of spare wedge. They wouldn't even notice it.
Yeah, and that's
got so much.
Basically, what it's about, and I wonder how it's going to play out because. As I say, the interesting thing about it is Facebook's gone to this measure where it's instead of having this peering arrangement, which, as I say, normally would be settlement free, but Deutsche Telekom wants money for it, has reverted to a transit arrangement of routing its traffic. Yeah. The problem with that, as I understand it, is that at some point it still has to go over an interconnection point that Deutsche Telekom controls.
Yes.
And therefore, Deutsche Telekom still has the ability, as the kind of gatekeeper of the network, to block or throttle that traffic if it wanted to.
Yeah.
In sort of retaliation for the fact that it's upset with Meta because they've not paid its peering fees that it's tried to charge. And obviously doing that would be a huge infringement of these net neutrality laws in Europe at the moment, which are very, very nebulous, and I don't go along with a lot of the content of them. But one of the core principles is that you don't block or throttle or discriminate against internet traffic.
Well, that's a core principle in net neutrality.
This has always been the case with fair share: is how far are the operators prepared to push it? If it comes to the point where they've tried to charge someone to do something, for their traffic, and the traffic, as they call them, traffic generators, but the actual content company, the people of the generators, the content companies turned around and gone, we're not going to pay that. Do they then turn around and go, well, we're going to block or throttle your traffic then? And I thought the twin statements that the two companies have come up with were really interesting because Meta's contained this paragraph about we've done all we can to find the best routing system that we can.
There's no reasoning with these people.
And but they also said we can only hope that Deutsche Telekom doesn't try to block or throttle and has made the same investments.
Doesn't get cute.
Deutsche Telekom, in its statement, said they've refused to do this peering arrangement. It's up to them how they route their traffic, and then basically any problems that you might see that might happen
is their fault.
Is their fault.
Yeah.
So they're trying to shift.
It's a blame game.
It's a blame game. They're trying to shift the blame to Meta, but I think it's a very dangerous game, I think, for DT, because they're obviously going to be perceived as the people who have...
Because they're the ones with the direct consumer relationship.
They're the ones with the direct consumer relationship, and they're the ones with the actual network infrastructure in Germany that this is going over. They're the ones who are... they're the ones who are held to account on net neutrality.
So do you think they might be slightly overplaying their hand in this one?
Yeah, I do think they're overplaying their hand. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to see how it plays out, but I think it's... If you see... I'd be very interested to see how regulators kind of view this whole thing, and especially if we start to see some kind of impact on service quality for Meta users, let's say, on the Deutsche Telekom network in Germany, where they're going to kind of come down, because net neutrality regulations, the onus is always on the telcos, really. It's not a thing for the internet companies to follow those rules. The internet companies always encourage that kind of system.
Yeah.
Whereas the telcos are the ones who have
maximum traffic.
They just want maximum traffic. The telcos are the ones who have to be able to show that they're being non-discriminatory and that they're not blocking and that they're not throttling.
Yeah, and a root of it, I mean, a lot of really core, like doctrinal, theological net neutrality debates happen in the States, and the thing is, if operators or carriers, as they call them there, could preference certain traffic, then that obviously gives them a whole massive new revenue stream.
Yeah,
and so of course they'd like to be able to do that. But they wouldn't say it openly because they know that it's a sort of pseudo-political and theological debate there, where if they try and make out that they want to be able to basically extort people for preferential service, then that's not a fucking great PR win for them. But yeah, it's tricky. And I think it is fascinating, and I think you covered it really well. I couldn't help noticing another, I quite often read your opening paragraphs because you have a little bit of fun going off. And I won't read the whole of your opening paragraph, partly in the name of time. But another thing that you do is you have some quite good similes. And at the end of your first paragraph, you say, the region's telecoms infrastructure looks as congested as a beer keller offering free drinks at Oktoberfest.
Well, it's inappropriate for Germany at this time.
Well, you like to make your similes topical, and I think that's good. Now I'm applauding your simile use. But listen, just because we banged on so long about AI, I've got to move it on.
Yeah, let's move it on.
And I will keep the last one fairly short and sweet.
Even though there's loads that could be said about the last one. If Pierre hadn't interrupted so much earlier.
If he hadn't, it's all on him. We might go a bit over the hour, mate.
You can just turn off everything.
You just turn off everything and fuck off. Just leave us here banging on in the dark, getting through our hazy Janes. Okay, so that's it.
That's good timing.
It is.
Thinking. Yeah.
So I wrote the story I wrote this morning before I came in for the pod was US state bailout of Intel nears completion. Now, I use the term bailout deliberately because that's not how the Americans, for their aforementioned fondness of euphemism and sugarcoating, call it, but that's what it fucking is. It's actually something. This is journalising an FT report, by the way. And so the FT story was headed, Intel and US race to finalise $8.5 billion in chips funding by year's end. Actually, this $8.5 billion has been flying around for a little while. We wrote about it. We wrote about it earlier in the year. But basically, and this is so funny, this makes me laugh. America passed this bit of legislation about a year or two ago called the CHIPS Act.
Yeah, I remember.
And CHIPS is capitalised.
50 billion or something.
Yeah, just whatever. I mean, they just chuck money around.
Pluck the money out of the air.
Well, they do every now and then.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened during the pandemic. It's happened during all these proxy wars that are going on. Every now and then they'll go, yeah, we need another $1 trillion. And they just go, yeah, whatever. We just fucking borrow it like we do everything else.
50 billion is actually about half as much as it costs apparently to build a train line from London to Birmingham. Anyway.
Yes.
So.
Or actually, I think there's been a similar sort of white elephant in California as well.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, yes.
I thought the Americans were good at that sort of thing.
No. I mean, I think like the Germans, we've just been cussing them. They're good at that. French, we were talking about earlier.
Spaniards are good at it, aren't they?
French, when it comes to trains, I mean, they've had TGV for about 40 years.
Yeah.
They shit all over us when it comes to certain types of
Why are they
infrastructure.
good?
They've got the
We
nuclear
aren't.
power plants as well. French are actually really good at infrastructure.
Sometimes I'd love to cover another sector just to work out why the French are good at trains and we're not. Like little questions like that you could really dig into as a journalist.
Well, I think the French public sector on the whole is massively superior to ours.
Yeah.
They've got this grande école where they all go off and...
Well, then you probably look at the national accounts and you go, "Oh, that's the reason why."
Yeah, no, there's plenty of issues there, but they're good at infrastructure in a way that we're not, and I don't think the Yanks are. But anyway, they came up with this thing called the CHIPS Act, and it's capitalised. And I tell you, I had to really research around. Yeah, so it's capitalised as if it's an acronym, but no one expands the acronym.
Right.
And I had to dig and dig and dig, and I eventually found the source.
Did you feel fulfilled afterwards?
I did, because another generalisation I'm going to make about Americans is they love a forced acronym.
Yeah.
They can't just have the SGBLGWA Act. It's got to actually spell something, and it's got to spell something topical.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might even be the we're really nice and altruistic and not profiteering act.
Is the
or
first
something
word
like that.
chips? Is the first word of the acronyms chips?
Check it out. Just sit back and listen. CHIP stands for Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors.
That doesn't even work properly.
It does. It's just the two.
It does. Okay, chips.
It does work.
Okay.
Anyway, that's a euphemism for saying chuck public money at the chip sector.
You should come up with another one that starts with Chuck.
Chuck.
Yeah.
Should we ever go on? If only you had more time. Chuck heaps
of investment
at the
public sector.
At private. What does S stands for?
Semiconductors.
Private. No, but we've got to find out something funnier than that.
Sausage. Chips and sausage.
Private selfish bastards. Anyway, so, and that's a euphemism for, we all know that America for the last few years, or certainly for the last year or two, has decided that, I use this term, which is a little bit sort of arcane, but hegemon. Basically, America is a global hegemon. It's the most powerful country in the world by quite a long way. Militarily, economically, culturally, basically any way you could slice it. And that's led to certain, which I think, counterproductive self-image things, like they use terms like American exceptionalism, which is to say that they just think they're a bit of a fucking special case. Now, they've got a strong argument for it. I just don't think it's a psychologically healthy place to be. Like an individual, it's almost like Sam Altman turned into a country. They just think they're something special. And maybe they are, but I just don't think that's a very healthy way to perceive yourself. Anyway, and
you don't say.
Do you know what I mean?
You should be a country.
And they've been the global hegemons basically since World War II, since the end of World War II, or arguably the middle of it. But China's an ascendant force. And there's another thing which I won't go off on, but people can look it up if they've never heard of it before, called the Thucydides trap or something like that, which basically says that a rising power always come into conflict with the incumbent.
Yeah.
Which is kind of intuitive and obvious, isn't it?
Yeah.
And China's the rising power, and it has been since it slightly opened up its economic system, I think starting in the 80s or whatever, and had this sort of what
he was
they call
right
it.
about Greece and Persia, was he, or something? Thucydides, the original one.
I think so, yeah, there we go.
Something. But,
I know we're getting a few classical references.
We've got a lot of classical references in this one.
And
podcast of culture.
There we are. We're not just a pretty face. Thank God. Thank God that's not what we're relying on. And anyway, America wants to keep China suppressed. America wants to stay on top. Now, on one level, you go fair enough, but on another level, you think, well, what gives you the right to just suppress everyone else just because you want to stay on top? I mean, if China's that much more efficient or working harder or whatever, yeah, exactly. And so that's what this CHIPS Act really is. It's basically saying that the most efficient and the most effective way of keeping China suppressed is to restrict their access to cutting-edge chip technology. And we've spoken about this loads on the pod before. ASML, 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer manufacturing processes and all that sort of thing. And this CHIPS Act, they announced back in March, was going to chuck about $20 billion at Intel, which, as we just said earlier, has only got a market cap of about 100 billion. So that's a fifth of its fucking value, just in wedge coming from the US taxpayer. 11.5 billion of which is, or 11 billion of which I think is loans and grants and all that sort of thing. But take the concept of loans with a pinch of salt, because loans are only loans if you ever pay the fucking money back.
Yeah. We don't do this sort of thing, do we, in the UK?
Well, we do, but to a much more shitty extent.
We wrote chuck a billion at some company.
No, we wrote a thing this week. I think Nick wrote quite a scathing headline of us just chucking a couple of quid at it.
Right.
You know, we treat our domestic champions more like King's Cross beggars, whereas in the States they will fucking go for it. And as you know, I'll come to my concluding paragraph, which sums up my opinion on this.
Well, I prefer our way of doing it.
Hmm.
I mean, I think you shouldn't do it at all, really. But you see, the public sector or it's private sector.
I actually don't mind which you do, as long as you don't have double standards, and I think America does on this. But anyway, so this CHIPS Act is about subsidising their domestic semiconductor sector, because they've decided that that's the critical battleground in their geopolitical trade war with China. Keep China suppressed by making sure America's much better at chips than China.
Yeah. Well, I've got a good example of one that we've done.
Go on.
The 5 billion, is it 5 billion for funding for rural broadband rollout?
Right, yeah.
Which goes into the hands of private sector companies for them to build networks that they then make money from.
Yeah.
It's like, I have a bit of a philosophical issue with that. Did the lights go on more brightly?
The lights just got bright, didn't it? I thought
I was.
But I think this came up.
I thought someone put some acid in my beer.
I think someone raised concerns about this at Network Britain. I seem to remember somebody saying.
Sorry, thank you. I was like, oh my God, I'm having a brain.
I think all three of us, the lights suddenly went brighter in the studio, and all three of us were like, was that just me?
My eyes, that happens to my eyes quite a lot anyway, so I just thought it was.
No, the lights definitely got brighter.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I thought I was freaking out there.
Thank you.
No, I remember someone at Connected Britain, I think, raising that as a concern, that they're sort of throwing this money around for rural rollouts when there might be a private company that wants to do a rural rollout and it hasn't got
wouldn't
access
need it.
to it. It wouldn't need it. It thinks it's got a business plan that you can do it anyway. So then automatically you've got this.
Well, this is an issue with state intervention on the whole. It distorts markets.
Stay out of these things. Do it in a transparent way. Don't do it in this kind of we're going to kind of give money to privately owned companies, and then where do we benefit necessarily directly as taxpayers from it?
Well, quite. And then the other point,
do you get a little bump up in your beer tokens?
Well, and then the other point about you're talking about taxpayers is that's money that isn't being spent on infrastructure or on social security or on education or on police or on
healthcare.
Whatever.
Healthcare
on public services in general. I probably could have said more concisely.
Yeah, you could. I like all the examples.
Yeah, I thought I'd labour the fucking point. And so that's basically what's going on. Is at the same time, Intel's having a bit of a nightmare, as we were touching on earlier when we were kind of slightly crashing it in our intro. They're having a bit of a nightmare. They've made some bad strategic decisions. Some things have gone a bit wrong. And I think basically the American state's shitting it because Intel's the only US company that actually makes chips, as opposed to Qualcomm, Apple, a few others who design chips, but then
there's loads. There's loads of designers.
Well, there's loads. Marvell, etc., etc. But who all just design it and then they get a fab, principally TSMC, which is based in Taiwan, which they're constantly paranoid that China's going to invade.
Yeah.
So that's that's the other thing that underpins this. How much they really believe China's going to invade Taiwan, I don't know, but that's always set up as this paradigm, this bugbear, this like we've got to spend all this money in case Taiwan gets invaded, and then China's got control of TSMC.
I think a lot of it comes from that.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of paranoia that shapes this thinking about why we need to have our own self. It's not too dissimilar to China's desire to have like extreme ultraviolet lithography capabilities, so that it doesn't have to rely on getting them from the Netherlands, which doesn't want to sell them anymore. It can't get them from the
because the
Netherlands
Yanks told them not to.
Yeah. So and it's the same thing with the US. They're concerned that if Taiwan is kind of cut off from them, then I think they're just concerned generally about not having any chip making. The way the world's gone in the last 20, 30 years is to this model where all the manufacturers in Asia and all the designers are in America, and Europe's quite good at doing tool making and blueprints. And that's the way the kind of world sort of works out.
It's just naturally segmented itself.
It's kind of segmented itself. And now in a globalized system, which everybody seemed to be happy with until Trump kind of came along, Oh, actually, I don't think that's. I think it's a
I think that's
simplification.
No, but I think this is a rare example of where Trump actually is representing the will of the overall American state.
Yeah.
He's largely antagonistic with it, or at least that's his. I mean,
his big thing was, made in America or whatever it is,
Yeah.
And,
So
and let's bring it back.
He's
home.
very parochial and nationalist.
We've lost jobs to chip making guys in. Why is it being done by TSMC? And I mean,
turns out, Donald, it's because their cost of labour is a fraction of yours.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. Economists will say, and The Economist magazine has written loads of articles about this, how it's hugely inefficient to have these. Sorry, Pierre's getting really.
No, it's not. It's just flexing his shoulders.
But it's hugely inefficient to have this approach where you do, and this is really relevant for our sector, by the way. This idea with 6G that it could become a kind of dual standard, and it's not a complete disaster, but it's a bit of a reversion to the days of 3G, where where you don't have a global market to produce for one standard. You're all of a sudden having to have phones that work on. Those dual band phones used to be bloody expensive, because you're not just able to build one system into the phone and have it work anywhere.
Quite, yeah.
It drives up the costs.
We had TDS, CMA, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so it's not, it doesn't work well to have it done that way. But it's the new geopolitical reality, and I think a lot of it is. This is where all this stems from, basically. But I think there's a huge amount of paranoia about the Taiwan.
It is, and I wonder to what extent it's, if not fabricated, then blown up to provide a pretext to exceptional public policy that you wouldn't be able to get away with. I mean, it's a standard arm of public policy is to constantly create, this is very Orwellian, constantly create an existential threat, because when there's an existential threat, anything is justified in combating it.
Do you know what? I don't think it's even just an existential threat. I think it's almost I don't want to say xenophobic, but I think it's
it's a little bit.
It's got to the point where that we just feel that, or America just feels that it doesn't want to see it coming out of Asia anymore. It wants to be able to do it itself.
Well, it's back to my point about maintaining its global hegemon status.
Yeah.
Well, let me quickly wrap it up, partly because we're running out of time and partly because I'm running out of time, if you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to just self-promote and read my concluding paragraph for the piece I wrote this morning, because it kind of sums up my position on exactly what we've just been talking about. So I talk about all these things, and I talk about how they've got political incentives with the US general election coming up, and the incumbents want to be seen to have achieved this perceived significant thing. But then I say one thing we can all agree on is that it's completely out of order for there to be strong links between the Chinese state and its major companies, as is alleged with Huawei. This is completely different, of course. The US state is merely supporting one of its own companies out of the kindness of its heart and is in no way corrupting the global trade system to further its own geopolitical aims. Perish the thought. So this is the only point, and I think you were alluding to this earlier. It's just the double standard. We're asked to believe this doublethink where a close alignment between the Chinese state and Huawei is bad, but a close alignment between the US state and Intel is okay. Yeah. And that's the only thing I push back on. It's either one or the other. Don't try and at least make me totally buy into that double standard.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds a good time to end it. We didn't go over that much, Pierre. I think we got a guest again next week. Oh yeah, of course we do. We got one of our colleagues, but I won't say it in case he's got to cancel. I was trying to avoid making that mistake. But we'll call it a day there, and thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for that one.